When it comes to keeping the top local talent home, this class of 2026 has been one of the weirdest recruiting cycles that I can remember.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, if there is such a thing. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC, and host of Postgame on the Miami Hurricanes radio network. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. On this loaded episode, we'll talk about Miami's place as ACC contenders and college football playoff contenders. Can they get over that hump this year despite not having Cam Ward running through that smoke this season? We'll get top scouting reports on Miami Hurricanes commitments and prospects because the best in the business is about to join us here. And as we bring on the man, the myth, the legend, our boy Blue, Larry Blustein. You know, Blue, my angle is not to say that like, oh, Mario forgot how to recruit and he lost his relationships with the South Florida high schools. Because if I look up to 2027, where Miami's got 4 verbal commits for the 2027 class, all 4 so far are from South Florida, 3 from Dayton Broward, 1 from Palm Beach. But then the class of 2026, Miami has 1 verbal commit from Miami-Dade Broward County, just 1. I know there's still a ways to go here in July, but Jordan Campbell is the only one. A bunch of local players have chosen to leave the area or even leave the state. Blue, you know better than anybody. Why has this class of 2026 been so bizarre when it comes to keeping players in the area?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and you know, you take a look at some of the elite kids, and a lot of them, you know, with the exception maybe of Derek Cooper from Chaminade Madonna, who's obviously as coveted as you're going to get, were pretty much, you know, looked at early on by other programs, and Miami kind of had average interest. They knew Diabell was not going to come. They knew he was going to go to Texas, although Dia's granddad worked at Miami for 28 years, you know. I mean, and his dad, Raja, used to go and hang out and shoot hoops all the time at Miami, and they were really close. But, you know, he got into that national tour where, you know, he went to some of them elite places for quarterbacks. And he, you know, I mean, obviously he was one. Justice Fitzpatrick, it was kind of a given early on that maybe go to Alabama because of his brother. But then all of a sudden, Georgia swooped down with a pretty good reputation of putting out defensive backs. So he was another one. As you mentioned, Jordan Campbell, who was actually the first commitment in the 2026 class for Miami overall. I mean, if you remember back when he was at Carroll City, I guess, you know, early on, and he said, you know what, I want to be here. He went to the Under Armour game, was one of the first juniors to ever play in Under Armour last year. I had an opportunity. I was there, watched him. One of the great kids, obviously. You look at Jabari Brady. There wasn't a lot of interest in you know, getting a guy like Jabari Brady because they felt that they had, you know, probably different guys. Denarius Gray from Chaminade kind of made his intentions known early on that he was going to probably go to Auburn, which he is. And then you look at, you know, well, I mean, I know Dayton Broward, but you got Javion Mallory, who's a Palm Beach kid, but, you know, he's got a lot of ties to, you know, to like Pompano area. So he's a kid you got. Brandon Bennett, who obviously started to, you know, make his mark as a 10-2-5 track kid, you know, ended up going to FSU. You know, he wasn't really somebody I don't think Miami pursued, you know, from the beginning. And then you look at other guys like Jason Lopez, who, you know, it came down to last, couple weeks ago, you know, you and I talk. I mean, he's a basketball player, but I don't know if he's really going to be an ACC type of basketball player because nobody knows better than you. The ACC is as good as you're going to get, in basketball. So you got to kind of give everything year round. So I think he kind of settles into a football position. And I personally don't think that thing's over yet. I still think that he,
Yeah.
because
you're right. Because Blue, he made these like right after he committed to Florida State, he made these comments where it's like, okay, I'm committed to them, but my recruitment is still open. I'm still taking business. Like it was like the softest endorsement I've ever heard for the program he's committed.
You look at somebody like him and, the kid Darrell Bell from Goldman, who actually was FSU's first commitment. So he really wasn't a Miami target because even though he came to a lot of Miami events, I mean, the kid's a really good safety, but, he made his intentions early on. Kaj Baker, the running back out of Pembroke Pines, his dad, who's the head coach there, he's going to UCF. A good fit for them because he's a smaller type of slot kid, but he's really, really fast. And then you look at guys like, the Karan Maycock kid who really didn't come onto the scene. He started growing into the position, and then FSU watched him and said, oh, okay, well, he's getting pretty big and he's a pretty good linebacker. So that kind of takes you like fairly deep into the recruiting. So Miami really, it's not a fault. I just don't think there was a lot of fits, especially in the 2026 class. I mean, like I said, you could take that square peg and try to put it in that round hole if you want, but I really didn't think guys like Dia Bell or, I don't think Dia was the type of quarterback, they were looking more of that, like Darian Coleman type and guys like that. And so I don't, I know everybody wants to blame everybody, but of the players that I mentioned, maybe Denarius Gray could have fit in, at the time, but Miami kind of, and it's no fault of their scouting, but they got, they get into this stuff. Remember, this stuff has to start now, Alex, as 10th grade. I mean, like this class of 28 right now is a focal point, even though we're 3 years away and 2 graduating classes away from 28. But a lot of this love is falling on 28, 27 right now. And that's where Miami's emphasis hadn't been in the past. But again, even though their scouting department is really good and they got a lot of great people in there and they're scouring, the entire area, I think it came down to a lot of these players weren't Miami type of guys. They weren't the players at Miami, even though the fans think that they were. You got to remember, the fans don't really know all about these kids. They know, well, Justice Fitzpatrick is this and his brother's great. But you know what? Miami, especially in the secondary, was looking, they were looking for these type of athletes that they're getting now. I mean, and you can't fault Miami for being a global recruiter because of the fact that look at they came up with in the offensive line, arguably one of the best offensive line classes coming up for 2026. And who's from here? Nobody, because there's not a strength at offensive line. So you got to kind of know where your strengths are. And I think that's the difference between a Mario Cristobal, who's had Alabama ties, who's had California ties, who's had West ties, who's had Midwest ties, and Texas type of ties, to utilize that and not so much worry about trying to fit these local kids in just because they're local.
Well, that rundown you just heard is why I knew I had to reach out to Blue today. You're not going to find a clearer explanation on that. And when we come back, I want to get into one of the names that Blue mentioned right off the bat, an uncommitted South Florida player who we're less than a week away from his decision, and that's Derek Cooper. Because the trends, for what it's worth, the trends have been maybe pulling him away from South Florida. Can Miami close that gap over the next 6 days? You want to keep it locked right here. We got our boy Blue with us on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Guys, Gametime is the only ticket app that I use. And you better believe we're going to be all over Gametime with football season right around the corner. We're less than 50 days away, 48 days now away from Miami versus Notre Dame. Miami Dolphin season is coming up. And yeah, guys, we've all been there. You log in early, waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale. only to lose your spot to a show you've been dying to see. Used to happen to me and my wife all the time before we discovered Gametime. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with stress or ticket shopping. That's where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. I got a killer last-minute deal to AC/DC a couple of months ago. That show had been, quote-unquote, sold out, but I got a great price on Gametime. Guys, if you're tired of endless scrolling trying to find the best deal, Gametime's Zone Deals it picks the best seats in your section for you. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets and concert show tickets with Gametime. Guys, you get a panoramic view in the app right from your seat before you buy, which is great. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create your account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, LOCKEDONCollege, for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. For your next listen, check out Locked On ACC. Kenton Gibbs and I are going to have a new episode coming up later on tonight. We're going to talk about ACC coaches on the hot seat. Now, spoiler alert, Mario Cristobal is not on a hot seat, but there are some in the ACC who definitely are heading into this upcoming season. We're talking Miami Hurricanes football now here on Locked On Canes with Larry Blustein. So, Blue, Miami has an opportunity coming up in less than a week to snag a guy I would say is the best remaining recruiting target for the Hurricanes in Derek Cooper. 5-star player, running back, athlete out of Chaminade, Madonna, and he's getting recruited like a 5-star player because you've got big-time schools like Texas, Ohio State, Georgia, who have very much been in the mix for Derek Cooper. Of course, Miami has been in the mix for him. So, Blue, again, like you probably have insights that the rest of us do not. A lot of the trends over the last few days have been looking like Texas Longhorns for him. Do you think Miami can pull this off by July 20th? And if not by July 20th, maybe by National Signing Day?
Well, here's the thing, too. A year, let's see, last probably of 24 February, he went to a Under Armour camp up in Miami. And there was not one person, John Garcia, any of the guys had ever heard of him before, because he came from Cardinal Gibbons, where he was kind of like being, used as a secondary type of player. Everybody projected him as a wide receiver. As a linebacker. And I have never, in all the years I've done this, seen anybody go from a flat out 0-star to a 5-star in less than 1 year. So he picked up where, like your Dia Bells and your Javon Mallory's and people like that have been in that elite picture since their 9th grade. Well, he wasn't in that. So right now he's had that red carpet crash course, thrown at him in every single direction, and he's loving it because he never had it before. My quick first, and I've followed him ever since youth football, and he's always been great. I always thought, he was underused, but that wasn't up to me at Cardinal Gibbons. That was their coaching, and they felt they had a senior that they were putting. But I felt that this guy was a John Beeson clone, because he's really a linebacker, and that's probably where he's going to settle in at the next level. They're going to see his size and his ability to make plays. He runs the ball extremely well, but everybody and all the scouts that I've seen, when we talk, see him, college coaches too, as a linebacker. Here's a guy that I thought for a minute, he would be a Miami guy. And then all of a sudden things change, you go here and then all of a sudden you fall in love with Ohio State, or you fall in love with Georgia, or you fall in love with Texas. And then before you know it, you're in a situation, especially now, that you could leave after a year. If you don't like where you're at, you can go somewhere else. So I thought it would be great to bring in a guy like that, being from South Florida, and then pair him with Javon Mallory and say to yourself, we just got the 2 best running backs in the country. Forget about, 2 best running backs in the ACC or in the Southeast. But I think that, as he goes more places and, his mom, great people, are told different things. Sales is prevalent everywhere. So I think Miami's got a shot, but I think it's going to be, it's going to be a lot tougher now than it was maybe a month ago, where everybody was crystal balling him here to Miami. And not so much now, because I think that a lot of people, he's had an opportunity to go to these different places and, and everybody, everywhere he goes, everybody tells him what he wants to hear. So, he's an exceptional player and certainly prove whatever, everybody said about him last year. I told you against St. Thomas, he took off 80 yards for a touchdown, outran everybody and pulled away to show that's the type of player. But, we were focusing in on the 2026 class so much, which is a good class locally, not a great class. Now, I think that Miami for the 2027 class, I think from 1 to 20, 25 in South Florida, there's program changers in that group. So that's where Miami, I think that if they say to themselves, okay, so we lost out on a Calvin Russell, or we lost out on, a Derek Cooper or somebody like that, I think their energy is going to start focusing in on 2027, because right now they're building enough of a fortress with nationally rated linemen that they could tell a quarterback or a running back or a wide receiver, hey, you come here, you're going to get every opportunity. We got the best line in the country, bar none. I mean, we're deep, we're, athletic. So I think that's where and then you got guys like Mark Matthews from St. Thomas Aquinas, who's 6'6", 270, who may see, hey, wait a minute. Look, Miami's starting to develop these elite kids. Because if you look like we're going to see Mauanoa go in the top 12, 13 picks, next April. He's going to be a first-round draft pick right out there. So you're already looking there. And then you're going to look at guys like Bell, who's going to get picked in the draft because he's come a long way. And you're going to look at guys like Okunlola. And then you're bringing in, you had Campbell, who's been in the bullpen. And you've had Wilkinson, and you've had Buchanan. You've had all those other guys, kind of tune themselves up. So this 2027 class, with potentially, Julius Jones, obviously a Notre Dame tie, but Amari Stevens, who's already committed to Miami, who's at Edison now as a slot wide receiver. I know they're heavily on the kid Tiari Miller, who just defensive back, who just transferred, to Central, and kids like Zayden Gamble and players like that, running backs like Amos Bradford from West Broward, who I think is going to be really good. You have Amari Nugent, who's a cornerback. So you're loaded in the 2027 class. So instead of, licking your wounds and say, well, we didn't get this guy or that guy, concentrate on the next class, because you got one of the top 7-8 classes going for 2026. So everything is not south, believe me.
Right. Well, I got a couple questions about 2027s, especially with reclassification possibilities, right? So one of the top players in that class Miami has verbally committed is Kenton Dobson III out of Miami Norland. Now, I recently rewatched the episode that you did with me back in March, right after Dobson verbally committed to Miami. And you said something back then about how good his grades are, how good he is in the classroom. You were the prophet Larry Blustein, because now Kenton Dobson, he's kicking so much butt in the classroom. He's talking about reclassifying, more than likely going to go from 2027 to 2026, because he can graduate a year early or a year and a half early even. So on Dobson, who could end up being a part of Miami's 2026 class, Blue, he's young. Yes, he's heading into 11th grade. He's already 6'1", 185. Do you think Kenton Dobson could be someone, if he gets to Miami in 2026, could he be a factor on the field early, even though he's a year younger than what a normal freshman would be?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's played, remember, every single snap since he walked into Miami Norland. He's been that type of guy. And, even when he was in the 8th grade and that little part of the going from 8th to ninth, like we're in now, you have a lot of these kids who are in 8th grade, but they can play 7-on-7 now. They can go to camps with their high school because technically they're out of middle school and they're going to high school now. So he was one of those guys when he was in the 8th grade, when they were playing 7-on-7s or camps or whatever, that everybody said, holy mackerel, what year is this kid? And they go, well, he hasn't even began to play high school yet. So it shows you what type of talent he is. Well-grounded kid, great family. Mom and dad are awesome, very supportive. They've been there from the beginning. Kenton's like 6'1.5". He's up to about 190 now. He's got great athleticism to play the corner, but he's got the physicality if needed to play safety. And he reminds me a lot of Amari Wallace, a kid that Miami got last year in this cycle that you and I talked about, I think, last July after, he got hurt and he had that compound fracture, and Miami was really, they were so good to him, as far as saying, hey, don't worry. Your scholarship's very much open for you. It's this and that. And that kid worked like a dog to the point where in the spring game, he had a pick. I mean, he did awesome for Miami. And I think that Kenton Dobson's that type of guy. He can come in and he's the new breed. It's not like Miami's getting, they're like for a 2, 3, 4 year period there, they're getting okay defensive backs. And it showed it, like
Right.
what last year. But now they're getting elite type of kids. They're getting really, really good kids. High. I'm not a star guy, but a high star rated kid, a producer at a high level. And I think Kenton Dobson would be, like the Malachi Tony, because let's look at Malachi Tony too. Here's a kid that should just be going into his senior year in high school. And a lot of people don't understand that he wasn't just a one-trick pony in spring. And you saw, I mean, he's a beast to the point where he's going to be an integral part of this team this year. You can't park that Ferrari in the garage. You just can't. And I've said it a long time, especially as a kick returner, he's so special. He's going to be a slot kid. He's going to push Ray. This is going to be a, as they say, a come to Jesus year for Ray, because he needs to step up his game. He's been here 3 years, and Malachi's a guy can produce this week, the Wale, if you're a baseball fan, it's the Lou Gehrig Wally Pipp thing. If you lose your position, you may never get it back. And that's how you build national championship teams. That's how Miami did back in the 80s and how they did in the early, in the 90s and into the early 2000s by competition. And I always said this, that you go to a spring game and then walk behind the bench and look at the names of the players and you go, Jesus, I forgot they had David Jefferson. Oh my God, I forgot that they had Edger and James. You see, those type of guys. And I think that's what Miami with a Kenton Dobson is building towards. And certainly to answer your question, I think if he does reclassify, he's going to be a guy that's going to come in and he's going to get right into the mix, because he's, you got to play the best. And if the best happens to be a 17-year-old, freshman who's going to graduate a year early, then he should, so be it.
Man, well, when we come back, I got to get Blue's take on the outlook for Miami this coming season, because yes, the Hurricanes just lost the top quarterback in America, #1 overall draft pick, Cam Ward. Can they be even better this coming year, despite Cam Ward not being the guy behind center? You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Got some fun stuff coming up on Locked On Canes and Locked On ACC. Going to be doing a crossover Locked On ACC episode with Locked On Nittany Lions to talk about which ACC teams might face off against at Penn State coming up in the next college football playoff. On our next episode of Locked On Canes, we're going to be talking with Father Leo, former longtime team chaplain, spent a lot of time on the Miami sidelines back in the glory days. He's going to join me and Bruce Warner tomorrow. And we're also, I'm going to do a crossover episode with Brian Smith of Locked On Seminoles and the Portal, and every Locked On Canes fan's favorite, Brandon Olson from Locked On Gators. I know you all love him. We're going to be doing a three-way crossover talking about recruiting in the state of Florida and the outlook there. So a lot of exciting stuff coming up between Locked On Canes and Locked On ACC. Always exciting when we have Larry Blustein on with us. So Blue, I don't want to ignore the fact that I think Carson Beck is going to have a really good year. I think he's got a chip on the shoulder. And I was actually on the Joe Rose show earlier this morning talking about the feedback has been really good for Beck in off-season workouts, that, physically he's doing fine. He's regained his timing and his touch and all that, and the arm is looking good. No concerns coming off the surgery, which is great. But of course, Cam Ward was Cam Ward, Blue. But then last year, Miami ultimately falls short of the ACC championship game, fell short of college football playoff qualification, primarily because the defense let them down. So you look at the additions Miami's made defensively with the personnel that they brought in and all the changes they've made with the defensive coaching. Jason Taylor is the only holdover from last year. Do you think Miami could, fingers crossed, actually be a better overall football team in 2025 than they were in 2024?
Yeah, without question. I mean, their defense alone. I mean, it's the secondary was horrible last year. Let's not, mince words. And they let everybody in every game, and you knew that coming into any contest that you were going to have to score 45 points just to win the damn game. And I don't think it's going to be like that this year. Your front seven is drastically improved with a lot of additions, with some returnees. Certainly, you and I talked earlier in the spring about Messidor being such a vital cog to that defense, especially because of his maturity and his, how many games he's played and his experience, and being a guy who communicates well with the younger guys. And obviously Bain is a bear, and that he's going to do the job, and their linebacking core has improved quite a bit as far as from a depth perspective. But where it all really changed is the secondary. All of the players in that secondary right now are quality players. I mean, and you look, they've all performed wherever they've been in the past, whether it's Jacksonville State or wherever they're coming from, they've always been able to, and then you add a kid like Lucas and players like that. Miami's defense will be so much better because you're not going to be able to pick apart that secondary like they did last year. You're not going to have as much time, and I think that Miami got kind of lulled into sleep, in the opener against Florida, which was not the best of teams, to open up the season. They got better as the year, but then you got kind of lulled with the Ball States and Florida A&M to think that everything was going to be like that, and then Virginia Tech popped up, and then a little reality came, and you weren't getting 7 sacks a game. But I think that the talent that they have now are players that could get it done against Notre Dame, and they can get it done against Bethune-Cookman and USF. And I think for that reason, on the defensive side, I think they're going to be 100% better than they were last year. So there you already have a huge, a huge starting point as far as determining what this team is going to be like. Then offensively, even though you have a lot of inexperience and you have a lot of questions to ask, Carson Beck is a great quarterback, no doubt. But as I said, and I told even, Mario was on our show, and I said, I always have a little skepticism when your new quarterback is really not active in the spring like Cam Ward. If you remember, Cam Ward threw for 5 touchdowns, 450 yards in the spring game, and you go, oh, my God, that's a position you don't have to worry about. But you didn't have somebody like Carson Beck. Yeah, he was there, but he wasn't there, okay? I mean, yeah, he was in a huddle, but at the same time, I think Miami's offensive line, I think their ability to run the ball and have depth at the running position. And yeah, they have ifs. And, you lose quality tight end to the NFL, and you lose 3 receivers that were really, really good. And, it doesn't matter how good, how productive anybody is, but you look at Restrepo and you look at guys like that made a difference for them. They're going to have to replace those players. Do they have the talent to do it? 100%. But they're going to have to get that experience. But I think that offensive line affords them, because Beck's going to have more time to look around. He's going to have a little bit more time with a running game where the defenses are not going to be stacking a box against him just to get to him to harass them, because if that happens, he's going to sting them. So, yeah, I think Miami's a lot better this year than they were last year. I think that along with Clemson, I think those are the two teams that could, I think that SMU's dropped off. I mean, even though they lost 5-6 key starters, including Brashard Smith, who was a top 4 running back, for them last year. And then, some really good players. The home games obviously help. Having 8 home games and not leaving the state of Florida for the first 6 weeks is perfect. You go to FSU, which, you know what? I don't care. It's always going to be a great game. It's, you think like 2 years, 3 years, it's going to be a blowout, but it's just one of those rivalries. And then you take a look at the back end of the schedule. And I think that's where your telltale is, because you're on the road against teams that you really haven't fared well against, like Virginia Tech, and they give you fits. Pittsburgh gives you fits. You're going to go to SMU for the first time. That's going to be a kind of a little bit of a test. So, you know what? I think Miami can win 10, 11 games. I really do. I think they solidify themselves. Let's face it. Notre Dame is the defending national runner-up, but they lost 8 guys, and that makes a difference. They lost some key guys up front. Yeah, they have a good running game. Lost some really good receivers. They lost some good linebackers. So that's going to be one of those games where Miami comes in, and they should be a favorite, and they should win that game. And and I think the fans are going to be there. I think this is going to be one of those games that on a Sunday night where you're going to get those 20, 27, 28 kids for the future that are going to be front and center. And that's going to be one of those games that I think that Miami's going to, kind of change things. Sure, Florida's going to come in as a much better team than they were last year. I had a chance to watch them during the spring, and I was up there for a couple of days, for camps, and, had a chance to look at what they have, and they have personnel. And, but to answer your question, I think this has got, all the earmarkings of Miami making the playoffs and being one of those teams that last year, why they fell short is they had one of the more dynamic offenses in school history, but their defense was horrible. And I don't think it's going to be like that this year. I think the defense is, I think that they have a D coordinator who has been there, done that. He's a lot like Mario Cristobal mindset wise, where he's not going to compromise, and he hasn't. And I watched him during spring and what he represents. And as you said, they've made changes at different positions. I think their secondary position is a billion times better than it was. Coaching wise, you got a great coach. I think you stole a coach who's not only a great X's and O's guys, but a guy who can recruit. And I definitely think this is going to be one of those years that fans are going to, you're building this thing for the future, because obviously, next year at this time, we're going to have a lot of question marks on the offensive line, because there's going to be, even though you're going to have talent, you're going to have a lot of younger guys in that position, because rightfully so, a lot of those guys, 4 or 5 of those guys, including a center that you just got this year, will be moving on. And but that's how you build winning teams, where you could start plugging in quality players. And I think Miami's recruiting in that way.
Yeah, I always learn something when I talk to Blue and when I listen to Blue and his radio show weekly on 560 WQAM, probably the most informative sports show in the country. Blue, let people know on WQAM what you have planned for this week's episode and where and when people can find it.
Yeah. Well, next week we're gonna plug in you. Then we'll have you on next Monday. But tonight we do have a pretty interesting show. We're kind of like wrapping up the summer. We'll take a look at a couple of colleges who recruit the area. Florida Memorial. Coach Jones has done a really, really good job in trying to get Florida Memorial, because remember, for every Power 4 guy that you have, there's 25 that are it. So we get him. We have Doug Sosha, who led Kaiser University to a national title 2 years ago. He's at Lenore Rhine in North Carolina. Had a great first year. He's recruiting down here. We'll have him on. We'll talk a little bit about some of the events that happened over the weekend. The Crib Classic, which was outstanding. So yeah, it'll be 6 to 8 tonight. WQAM. Trevor Harris back in our producing seat. He works hard with us, and it's going to be it's always a good time. And like I said, next week we'll start getting a little more hurricane intensive, and we'll bring you on and we'll kind of banter around some good stuff. And give it a listen. I think you'll enjoy it. We have 6 guests every week. If you don't listen to one, you could always make it up and go on our podcast, and just like old times. But I'll be up in your way Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We have media days up in Orlando for over 105 schools from Polk County all the way out to the coast. And we'll get an opportunity to see a lot of these kids at Miami committed. That was one of the things that was our mantra this year. We went to 13 different colleges in the state, saw almost 5,000 kids, almost 300 7-on-7 teams, including Armwood, which has a really good defensive back that'll be in Miami next year.
Yes, sir.
So we had an opportunity to see a lot of Miami commitments. We watched the kid Irvin over at Fort Myers, who's going to be a stud. It is. You know what? That's the thing. I learned, everybody goes, well, geez, you must put a lot of miles on. But you know what? It doesn't matter, because you get a chance to see all these kids firsthand instead of watching film or hear what somebody else has to say about them. But and then we kind of transferred over to the radio show, and we get a lot of these kids on the show and hear what they have to say. And so we're excited about it, and we appreciate, as always, being with you. It's been a while. So now you're back and back in the saddle, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, I was on a 41-day European tour, Blue. I was starting to miss home after a while. Yeah, I was over across the pond.
I didn't know that. I knew you were away, but I didn't know it was that long. Good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I know you went to Italy, and I know you probably saw soccer somewhere.
I didn't, because off season, and the only games that were going on were back over in the States for the Club World Cup. So I was watching on TV. Games.
Did you get a chance to maybe pass by some of the stadiums or so?
I did. I sure did. Yeah, I passed by the San Siro in Milan, where my beloved Inter Milan play. Went right by a couple different stadiums in Italy, Bologna.
Good for you.
La Spezia, a bunch of different spots. So we had a good time.
I'm sure you worked on your Italian pretty good, and I'm sure Mom and Dad are very proud that you're keeping that heritage going strong.
Keep it going. Trying to pass it down to my son as well, who made his first trip over there with us. Yeah, so we appreciate Blue so much. Make sure, by the way, you check out his show and follow him on X at Prep Red Zone FL. He's so informative and is always keeping everyone in the loop. Make sure you follow us at Locked On Canes and at Alex Donno on X. Make sure you check out the Portal podcast with Brian Smith, who does an incredible job taking you through all this recruiting stuff, NIL, transfer portal. He keeps you informed right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.